You want me to cancel our trip to Greece because of your doctor's appointment? That's what my daughter said when I asked if she could drive me to chemo. I didn't ask for much, just a ride. 40 minutes each way. But apparently, that conflicted with an unmissable vacation. They'd booked it months ago, she said, and she sighed when she said it, like I was asking her to chop off a limb. It wasn't even the words that cut. It was the way she said appointment, as if I was being dramatic, as if chemotherapy were just some routine errand, like picking up laundry detergent or getting her nails done. Well, she added, maybe we can reschedule things when we're back. Okay? I swallowed the lump in my throat, said, "Sure, honey. Don't worry about it." That's what I said out loud. What I didn't say, I didn't choose this. I didn't choose the cancer or the nausea or the cracked bones or the fatigue that makes me grip the kitchen counter every morning just to stay upright. And I sure as hell didn't choose to feel like an obligation to the very person I once carried inside me. I hung up, sat still for a while, and watched the light move across the floor. It was 11:37 a.m. by the old clock in the hallway. I remember noticing the time. It was quiet, that kind of sharp silence that settles after disappointment. I stood up slowly, feeling the usual stiffness in my knees. Put the kettle on, made tea I didn't drink. I must have just sat there, holding the warm cup, staring at the fridge. The calendar still had a pink circle on the date. Treatment, 1 p.m., room 206. Later that afternoon, I opened my Facebook, a habit I should have dropped years ago, and there they were, smiling, tan, holding cocktails the color of mangoes. My daughter, her husband, and their 2 boys standing on a sunlit cliff in Santorini. "We needed this," the caption read. "Family first?" I stared at those words. Family first. Until they stopped making sense. When did I stop being part of that word? That night, I didn't sleep. Not from the pain, not from the drugs, just from the heavy churn of thoughts. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their smiles against the backdrop of whitewashed villas and blue roofs. Her sun hat tilted just so. My grandsons with their arms draped over her shoulders. I never blamed her for needing a break. But I did blame her for pretending. Just tell me the truth. Tell me you didn't want to deal with it. With me. With hospitals and the smell of disinfectant and the rattling sound I make when I'm too tired to sit up straight. That I could understand. But don't post pictures with hashtags about gratitude and then leave your mother alone in a waiting room. The next morning, I called the clinic myself, asked if they had any transport options. They did. A shuttle, twice a day. You had to wait in the cold sometimes, and the driver didn't always help you to the door. But it was better than nothing. "Will you be coming alone?" the nurse asked. I paused, then said, "Yes, I'll manage." She hesitated. "You sure you don't want someone with you the first time?" "It helps." I smiled into the phone, though she couldn't see it. "No, dear. I've been alone before." I didn't mention that I'd also delivered my daughter alone in a cramped county hospital room during a snowstorm in 1972, because her father had gotten stuck on the highway and missed it. I didn't mention that I'd raised her while working night shifts at the nursing home, drinking instant coffee and sewing her clothes by hand. I didn't mention that I once went without heat for a whole winter to pay for her braces. I didn't say any of that. I just confirmed the appointment and thanked the woman kindly. Because that's what you do when you're an old woman. You keep the story to yourself. You let everyone else believe you're fine. The shuttle came at 8:05. A battered white van with peeling decals, and a driver who looked no older than my youngest grandson. He didn't say much, just glanced at my name on the clipboard and nodded toward the back seat. The step was high. I gripped the door handle with both hands and hoisted myself up, trying not to show how much it hurt. He didn't offer help. Not that I expected it. There were 3 others already inside. An older man with skin the color of wax, a woman knitting something blue without looking, and a young girl who stared at her phone like it was feeding her oxygen. None of us spoke. What was there to say? We all had our bags, our silence, and the weight of something we weren't allowed to complain about anymore. Cancer wasn't tragic these days. It was just a plot twist. Something to slap on a t-shirt with a ribbon and call awareness. The ride took 47 minutes. I know because I counted every turn. When we reached the clinic, the driver didn't even glance back. I climbed down slowly, steadying myself on the edge of the door, and walked toward the entrance. Room 206 smelled like bleach and mints. Too clean and too sweet. The nurse who greeted me wore bright pink scrubs and had a name tag that read Talia. "First time?" she asked gently. I nodded. She led me to a recliner, tucked a warm blanket around my legs like I was a child. I hated how good it felt, how kind she was. It made everything inside me tighten. "You can put your bag there. I'll start the IV in a minute, okay?" I nodded again, wordless. Once the needle was in, she adjusted the drip and smiled. "Just rest. We'll keep an eye on you." I closed my eyes and listened to the sounds. The steady beep of machines, the low hum of voices, a cough, a sigh, a soft click as someone flipped a magazine page. No one cried. No one ever does. There's an etiquette to suffering. You endure quietly so you don't embarrass anyone. 2 hours later, I was done. I stood too fast and had to grip the chair to keep from falling. Talia rushed over, hands out. "Easy, Mrs. McCarty. Let's sit a second, okay?" "I'm fine," I said, too sharply. "Just dizzy." She didn't argue, just sat beside me, handed me a cup of water. "You came alone?" "Yes." "Is someone picking you up?" "No." I looked away. "I'll wait for the shuttle." She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, we'll make sure you're steady before you go." Kindness again. Too much of it, and I'd break. I sat in the waiting room afterward, sipping the water, watching the parking lot through the glass. SUVs and sedans pulled in and out. Spouses leaning on each other. A man holding his wife's purse while she adjusted her wig. And I sat alone, a paper cup crumpling in my hand. When the shuttle finally came, the driver looked bored. "You McCarty?" "Yes." He opened the door, didn't speak again until he dropped me off. At home, I kicked off my shoes and sat in my kitchen, staring at the backsplash I'd tiled myself 20 years ago. The grout lines weren't perfect, but they'd held. So had I. For a long time. I checked my phone. No messages. Not from her. Not from either of the boys. I didn't expect flowers or confetti, but maybe a "how'd it go, Mom?" wouldn't have been too much. I scrolled again, and that's when I saw it. More photos. This time they were on a boat. My daughter in a flowy sundress. Her husband in swim trunks, holding a glass of wine. My grandsons doing cannonballs off the side into a cerulean sea. The captions said, "Living our best life. Family bonding, are grateful." I stared at that last word, grateful. And something in me, quiet for years, stood up. I'd made excuses, for decades, for her tone, her distance, her forgetfulness. "She's busy," I used to say. "She's stressed. She means well." But there's a line. And today I'd crossed mine. Not in anger, Not yet. In clarity. That night, I took out the old photo box from the top shelf in the hallway closet. Not the albums. They were for visitors, tidy and curated. The box was for me. Untamed, scattered, full of corners and creases and truth. I sat at the kitchen table with a blanket around my shoulders and spread the memories out like cards in a game I'd never learned to win. Here was one of me holding her, wrapped in a hospital blanket. June 12th, 1972. I remember the heat that day. No air conditioning in the ward, just a single fan creaking on its base. She was red-faced, screaming, a little bundle of fury and need. I was 25 and terrified. Her father had gone missing for 3 days, showed up drunk and barefoot at the hospital just after they stitched me up. I didn't leave him right away. That came later. 3 years later, in fact, after he slammed a door so hard, the glass shattered and cut my arm. I packed a bag, picked her up, and left while he slept. There was a picture of our first apartment after that. Second floor, crooked porch, radiator that hissed like a snake. She was 4 in that photo, sitting on the kitchen counter, dipping a spoon into a mixing bowl. We'd been making pancakes for dinner, not because it was fun, but because flour, eggs, and water were all we had. I remember her laughing, sticky batter on her chin. I remember working double shifts at the hospital, missing her school plays, coming home to find her asleep in front of the TV, clutching a blanket I'd crocheted out of leftover yarn. The next photo was her high school graduation. She was beaming, hair done up in curls. I stood beside her, a little heavier back then, in a thrift store dress I'd hemmed by hand. Her father didn't show up. I remember how tight her grip was on my arm as they called her name. Then came college. First acceptance letter, first dorm move-in, the goodbye hug that lasted too long. I cried the whole drive home. She didn't come back for Thanksgiving that year. Said she had papers to write. I believed her. I kept believing her. When she started her job in Boston and called once a month. When she met that man and didn't tell me until they'd already moved in together. When they eloped instead of having a wedding. When the boys were born and I was only invited to the christening because her husband's mother couldn't make it. Every time I felt the sting, I told myself it was fine. She's busy. She's doing her best. She doesn't mean to forget. But the truth was in these photos. Not just in who was present, but in who wasn't. As I sorted through the images, I realized how many had only one adult in them. Me. She was in the photos, but never behind the camera. I'd done this alone, not perfectly. God knows I made mistakes. I was impatient, stubborn, sometimes too tired to listen. But I'd shown up. Every damn time. And now? I couldn't even get a ride to chemo. Not because they were working. Not because of illness or emergency. But because they were sipping cocktails in the Aegean Sea. Tagging themselves with gratitude. I gathered the photos back into the box with trembling hands. Not from sadness. From something older. Older than grief. Older than guilt, rage, not the shouting kind, not the dramatic kind, the cold, silent kind, the kind that clears the air, that makes things visible. I made myself a sandwich I didn't finish, took 2 painkillers, went to bed and lay there in the dark, listening to the house breathe. This was the home I'd kept together through decades of storms. Now I had to decide what it was still worth, and for whom. The next morning, I had a follow-up with Dr. Elkins. I didn't want to go, not because I was scared of bad news. I already knew the news was bad. I didn't want to go because I didn't feel like pretending. Pretending to be hopeful, pretending to be grateful, pretending to be part of a system that wraps suffering in polite conversation and calls it resilience. But I went. Same shuttle, same driver, different passengers this time. An older couple holding hands, a man in a suit who looked too young and too healthy to be in that van. We all sat in silence. At the clinic, Dr. Elkins greeted me with his usual warm eyes and dry mouth. "Jeanette," he said, "thanks for coming in. We got the results from your last labs." I nodded, sat down. He clicked through the chart on his monitor. "The markers are holding steady. That's good. We'll continue with the same protocol for now." He paused, looked at me gently. "How are you managing with support? Do you have help getting to treatments?" The question caught me off guard. I opened my mouth to lie. It was habit by now. But something stopped me. "No," I said. "Not really." He turned his chair toward me. "Do you want me to arrange transport through the oncology social worker? There are options." I shook my head. "I'm managing, but thank you." Managing. That word again. It was the senior citizen version of fine. A soft word we use when we don't want to explain ourselves. He didn't push, just nodded, scribbled something, then said, "You know, the first few treatments are the hardest. You'll feel it more before it gets better. I'd recommend keeping someone nearby for the next one, just in case." I smiled politely. "I'll consider it." He knew I wouldn't. Afterward, I went to the waiting room to sit for a minute before calling the shuttle again. That's when I saw her, Patricia, my neighbor from 3 doors down. She was sitting with her husband, Harold, who wore a cardigan even in summer and walked with a cane. Patricia spotted me first. "Jeanette?" "Oh, sweetheart. I didn't know you were coming here." I tried to hide the fatigue. "Second round today." She stood and hugged me. Soft, warm, lavender-scented. I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone had hugged me. "We're here for Harold's follow-up," she said. "Colon cancer. He's doing better, but the drive tires him." Her voice softened. "You come here alone?" I nodded. "You shouldn't," she said firmly. "That's not right." I didn't answer. "You call me next time," she said. "Or Harold'll drive you. Won't you, Harold?" He smiled gently. "Course I will, if she doesn't mind the car smelling like mints and cough drops." I laughed. For the first time in days. Real, shaky laughter. It was strange. I'd raised a daughter who left me behind, and here was a woman I barely knew offering more in one moment than my own blood had in months. When the shuttle arrived, Patricia walked with me to the curb. She didn't say much, just squeezed my hand and said, "You're not as alone as you think." I nodded, climbed in, and watched her disappear behind the clinic doors. That night, I sat with that moment longer than I expected. A woman with no obligation to me had made space in her life without hesitation. No hashtags, no empty gestures. Just a hand, offered quietly. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to remind me what dignity looked like. The next morning, I opened the drawer in the hallway table. The one I hadn't touched in years. It stuck at first. The wood swollen from seasons of humidity and silence. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them, receipts, bank statements, copies of checks I'd written over the last 30 years, tuition payments, car repairs, down payments, medical bills not mine. I took them all out and spread them across the dining table, watching the paper form a history no one else had read. There was the check I wrote when they bought their first house. $50,000 labeled gift because her husband had insisted it couldn't be a loan. It's awkward if it's a loan, Jeanette. Let's not do that. There were the receipts from the orthodontist. I paid for both boys' braces, and the school uniforms for that fancy private academy, and the new roof after the hurricane, and the SUV when her husband got promoted. He needs to look the part, she said. Each sheet was a silent transaction, a thread that had kept me tethered to them. I'd told myself it was generosity, that I was helping, that this was what mothers did. But now, under the fluorescent light in my kitchen, it felt more like tribute. A tax I paid for their approval, for a seat at the table, for the illusion that I still mattered. I found the card they'd sent for my 75th birthday. A generic Hallmark greeting. No message inside. Just love, Melissa and Tom. No thank you. No, I remember. No, I'm glad you're still here. Just ink on cardstock. Just enough to pretend. I gathered the papers into a neat pile. Then I took out a clean legal pad and started making 2 lists. What I gave, what I got. By the 3rd page, the contrast was unbearable. I gave stability, security, unquestioned support. I got cancellations, delays, lies, not always, not right away, but slowly. A quiet erosion of care, like a shoreline vanishing grain by grain while no one looks. I closed the pad and sat there for a long time, watching the birds peck at my lawn through the window. There was still a whisper in my head. She's your daughter. You can't just walk away. But another voice had started to rise, firmer, steadier, older than the whisper. And you are a person, not a purse, not a ghost. A person. That voice didn't shout. It didn't need to. It had waited decades to speak. I didn't sleep that night. Not from the pain, not from the treatment. I sat in the living room in my robe with a glass of water I never drank, listening to the house creak and sigh as it settled. It was the sound I used to love, the sound of something familiar, something mine. But that night, it felt different. Not comforting, not safe, just hollow. Around 2 a.m., I walked into the spare bedroom, the one I'd kept made up all these years. For visits, I used to say. But no one had slept there in over 5 Christmases. I opened the closet, pulled out the fireproof safe and set it on the floor. The combination came back to me by muscle memory. A click, another, and it opened. Inside were documents. The deed to the house, the will, the power of attorney I'd signed 5 years ago, giving my daughter full control over my medical and financial affairs if anything were to happen. I'd signed it because she insisted. Mom, it's just a formality. Everyone our age does this for their parents. I believed her. But now, looking at that paper, I saw it for what it was. A silent surrender. A quiet erasure of my autonomy, signed in blue ink on a Thursday afternoon. I picked up the folder and set it on the kitchen counter. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Esther Greenwald, she answered. Her voice hadn't changed. Brisk, intelligent, no time for nonsense. Esther, it's Jeanette McCarty. I need to make some changes. She paused for half a breath. What kind of changes? All of them. By 11:30, I was in her office. She offered coffee. I declined. We sat across from each other like we had years ago when I'd first set up my estate. Back then, I'd been concerned with making things easy for my daughter, clear, simple. She deserves it, I'd said. Now, I wasn't so sure. I want to revoke the power of attorney, I said, immediately, and I want to update the will. Esther raised an eyebrow. That's a serious shift, Jeanette. What's happened? I didn't want to explain everything. I didn't want to relive it. But I offered her one sentence. She left me alone for chemotherapy so she could drink wine in Santorini. Esther stared at me, then nodded. We spent the next hour drafting the revocation. Then she asked about the will. What do you want to change? I opened my purse and pulled out a photo, crumpled at the corners from years of carrying it. My grandson, Henry, 12 years old, smiling with both front teeth missing, a grin full of hope and mischief. This boy, I said, he's the only one who still sees me. Esther nodded again. Understood. I changed the will, set up a trust, removed my daughter's name from everything except one line. No inheritance shall be granted to the named individual Melissa Thomas, as per the testator's direct and personal decision. When I was done, Esther placed a hand on mine. Do you feel okay about this? I thought about it, then nodded. I feel like I just stood up, I said. The next morning I called Henry. I didn't want to sound dramatic, didn't want him to hear the tremor in my voice. I just wanted to hear his. Hi, Grandma, he answered on the second ring, his voice bright, out of breath like he'd just come in from running. Hi, sweetheart, I said. Hope I'm not interrupting. No, I was just playing that space game. The one with the ship upgrades? I figured out how to beat level 9. I smiled into the phone. I didn't understand a word of it, but it didn't matter. His joy was enough. Grandma, are you okay? You sound kinda tired. I had a treatment yesterday, I said simply. A pause. Did Mom go with you? No, I answered. Another pause. Then, oh. It wasn't judgment. It was confusion. That was worse in some ways. Children don't question love. They assume it's just there, like oxygen. He was quiet a moment, then said, I wish I lived closer. I'd go with you. Tears pressed behind my eyes. I looked out the kitchen window into the backyard where the hydrangeas had started to wilt. I know you would, I whispered. Grandma, he said after a while, can I come visit soon? Like, just me? Maybe we could make pancakes. I almost laughed. Do you remember how? No, he grinned. But you do. I closed my eyes. The pressure in my chest loosened just a little. Yes, I do. He talked for 10 more minutes. About school, his favorite teacher, a dog in the neighborhood that barked like a car horn. I let his words wash over me like warm rain. Ordinary, wonderful things. Before we hung up, he said, I love you, Grandma. I told him I loved him too, more than he'd ever understand. After the call, I sat in the quiet house and let myself feel something I hadn't allowed in years. Hope. Not the naive kind. Not the desperate kind. The quiet, grounded kind that comes from knowing that not everything is lost. That afternoon, I pulled out a notebook and wrote a letter. Not to Melissa, not to the boys, to Henry. It began. My dearest Henry, if you're reading this someday, it means you were the light I held on to when everything else dimmed. You made me feel seen in a world that had learned to look past me. I wrote for pages, not bitterness, not regret, just truth and love. And stories he'd never heard, about how I met his grandfather, about the time I got fired from the hospital for refusing to lie to a patient, about the day he was born, and how I waited in the hall for hours just to hold him first. I sealed the letter and placed it in the envelope with the documents Esther had prepared. The trust, the instructions, the copy of the new will. Then I slid everything into the drawer next to my bed. It wasn't a grand gesture. There'd be no announcement, no confrontation. Just a quiet shift, a redirection of everything I had left to give. Henry had offered me 10 minutes of his day, and I gave him my legacy in return. Not out of guilt, not out of revenge, out of clarity and love. I sold the house 2 weeks later. No ceremony, no tears, just a listing, a walkthrough, and a closing date. The realtor was a soft-spoken man named Alton, who'd helped me refinance back in the early 2000s. When I called, he remembered me instantly. "Jeanette McCarty," he said, "the nurse with the neatest lawn on the block. Still got those white shutters?" "For a little while longer," I replied. He came by the next day. Walked through the rooms like someone visiting an old friend. He asked gentle questions. I gave simple answers. When we stood in the backyard, the one I'd mowed every Sunday, even when my knees ached, he looked at me carefully. "You sure about this?" I nodded. "I don't need a house this size. I need something simpler, something that doesn't echo so loud." He didn't press. Within 6 days, he had 3 offers, all over asking price. I picked the buyer who'd written a letter, a young family, 2 little girls and a dog named Rayson. They said they loved the way the afternoon light hit the porch, said it felt like a home with stories. They were right. When I signed the papers, I didn't cry. Not when I handed over the keys. Not when I walked through the empty kitchen one last time. Not even when I stood in the driveway and looked back at the front window where Melissa used to tape her drawings as a child. No tears, only breath, deep and steady. The money went into a new account, separate, quiet, tied to the trust for Henry. What was left I used to secure a spot at a quiet assisted living community called Alder Row. 1-bedroom units, private kitchenette, wide windows, and peace. I moved in with 3 suitcases and a carton of books. The manager, a cheerful woman named Gwen, showed me to my apartment herself. "It's small," she said, "but we've found most people like that. Feels manageable. Cozy." I looked around. Cream-colored walls, a soft chair by the window, a narrow bed with a firm mattress. It didn't feel like less. It felt like finally. By evening, I had unpacked the essentials. My kettle, my shawl, the photo of Henry from 2nd grade, the small ceramic owl Melissa made in art class when she was 7, still chipped at the base. I didn't hang much on the walls. I liked the clean space, the stillness. That night, I made myself tea, sat by the window, watched the sun ease behind the trees. No calls came. None were expected. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone to remember me. I was just here. Enough. 3 days after I settled in at Alder Row, Melissa called. Not to ask how I was, not to see if I needed anything. She called because the house sale had posted publicly, and a neighbor texted her. Her voice came fast, clipped. The tone she used when she was trying to sound calm but couldn't quite pull it off. "Mom, I just saw the listing. You sold the house?" I was sitting by the window, watching a pair of squirrels fight over a crust of bread. I let her question hang in the air a moment before I answered. "Yes." A pause. "But why didn't you tell me?" I smiled, not unkindly. "I didn't think you'd be interested. You're usually so busy." She exhaled sharply. "Mom, come on. That was our house. My childhood." "It was my house," I said, not loudly, just firmly. "I bought it. I fixed it. I paid for every shingle and pipe and grocery bill that crossed its threshold." Another silence. She didn't like being interrupted. "But you could have at least asked," she said, quieter now. "I mean, it could have been kept in the family." I looked around my new living room. Modest, yes, but calm. Clean. Mine. "And who in the family," I asked, "would have wanted it?" She didn't answer. I waited. Finally, she said, "Where are you staying?" "In a place that fits, with people who don't forget I exist." She didn't like that either. "Mom, is this about the trip? Greece?" I looked at the clock on the wall. 10:41 a.m. She'd lasted 8 minutes before bringing it up. "I didn't call you to argue," she added quickly. I feel like you're making a lot of big decisions without involving me." I felt my hand tighten slightly around the edge of the windowsill. "Sweetheart," I said, "you weren't involved when I was too sick to drive myself to chemo. I don't see why you'd need to be involved now." It hung there, that word. Chemo. She hated it. It reminded her I was still mortal, that I could still demand something real. There was a long silence, then a breath. "Are you mad at me?" That one almost made me laugh. "I'm not mad, Melissa. I'm clear. There's a difference." She was quiet. I imagined her standing in her kitchen, arms crossed, brow furrowed. The same look she used to give Henry when he'd break something, and she wasn't sure if it was worth getting angry over. "I just wish you'd said something," she said finally. "I didn't know things were that serious." And there it was, that accidental admission, that all this time she'd had no idea what was happening, because she hadn't asked. I didn't say anything. She cleared her throat. "So, are you okay at least? Where you are?" I looked around the room. Light. Quiet. A single orchid blooming on the windowsill. "I'm better than I've been in years," I said. And I meant it. We ended the call shortly after. No raised voices. No closure. Just a soft clicking silence as the line went dead. I sat with that silence for a long time. And for once it didn't feel empty. It felt like space. Room to breathe. Room to begin again. I began packing long before the moving truck came. Not things. I had little left that felt essential. But habits, thoughts, old rehearsed excuses. The apartment at Alder Row filled up slowly. A book here, a cup, a sweater draped over the arm of a chair. I didn't rush. For once, I let the space tell me what it needed, not the other way around. Every morning I made tea, sat by the window, watched the light move across the floor like a silent guest. I'd never known how peaceful 9 a.m. could be when no one expected anything from you. I saw Gwen most mornings in the common room. Sometimes we exchanged a few words, sometimes just a nod. She never pressed, and I was grateful. There's a special kindness in people who know how to leave space around you. A week in, Henry called. "Grandma," he said, "Mom's kind of freaking out." I smirked at the ceiling. "Is she now?" "Yeah. She said you're not answering her texts, and that you changed your will or something. Is that true?" I didn't lie. "It is." Silence. Then, "Why?" I closed my eyes. Not because I didn't know how to answer, but because I wanted to answer right. Because I needed to protect what mattered, I said. "And lately, Henry, that's been you." He didn't say anything at first. Then I heard him sniffle, just once. "I didn't do anything." "You didn't have to. You showed up. You called. You cared. That's more than anyone's done for me in a very long time." Another pause. "Are you mad at Mom?" I thought for a long moment. "No. I'm tired of waiting for her to be someone she never tried to be." "Grandma, I'm not telling you to pick sides," I added gently. "But I am telling you this. When someone shows you they don't value your time, your health, your presence, you have a right to walk away. He was quiet. Then, "Can I still come visit?" I laughed softly. "Of course, the guest chair is already broken in." He chuckled. "Good. I was worried I'd have to stand." We talked a little longer about school, his new math teacher, a girl who borrowed his notes and never returned them. I listened with the kind of attention I used to give patients in hospice. Full, still, present. After we hung up, I opened my top drawer, took out the sealed envelope with his name on it. I added a sticky note. Updated trust information inside. When you're old enough, open it. Love you. Then I closed the drawer. Later that day, I walked down to the mailbox. My knees protested, but I ignored them. The breeze was cool, the sky soft and unthreatening. The woman from 2B passed me on the sidewalk. She nodded. "How are you settling in?" "Like a tree that finally found the right soil," I said. She smiled. "That's a good feeling." It was. I no longer had a hallway full of forgotten birthdays. No more refrigerator magnets holding up photos of people who never called. No more waiting. I was somewhere new, somewhere small, but mine. And that, after everything, was enough. She showed up without warning. No call, no text, no announcement. Just her tall figure in a beige coat at the glass doors of Alder Rose lobby, her hand clenched around a designer purse like it held her dignity. Gwen knocked gently on my door. "Jeanette? There's a woman here. She says she's your daughter." I didn't react. Just placed my cup of tea down and stood. My heart wasn't racing. It didn't even stir. I was past that now. "Let her in," I said. Melissa entered with the awkward energy of someone used to controlling a room and unsure how to handle it when the room didn't respond. The door closed behind her. She glanced around, taking in the neat little apartment. The teacup, the blanket, the chair. I watched her catalog it all in her mind. She didn't sit. "You could have told me," she said. No greeting, no smile. "I did," I replied. "On the phone." She frowned. "No, I mean before you made all these changes. The house, the will, the account. I had to hear it from Henry." I raised an eyebrow. "So you did talk to him?" She folded her arms. "Of course I did. He's upset, confused." "No," I said gently. "He's clear." "You're the one who's confused." Her mouth tightened. She looked down at her shoes, then back up. "Why now?" she asked. "Why pull away like this after everything we've done for you?" I almost laughed. "What you've done for me?" I asked, voice calm but sharp. "Melissa, what have you done? In the last 10 years? Name one thing." She opened her mouth, closed it. "I bought your first house," I continued. "Paid for both boys' school. Covered bills when your husband lost his job. Watched your kids when you went on retreats. Sent groceries, money, checks, without you asking. And what did I get in return?" She didn't answer. I got ignored, forgotten, dismissed. I got phone calls on Christmas morning that lasted 90 seconds. I got excuses. And then, when I asked for one small thing, a ride to chemotherapy, I got a text from you saying you were busy, that you had a trip planned. Her voice rose. It was one trip. It was the only one that mattered, I snapped. Because I didn't need help with a chore. I needed you to act like a daughter. She stared at me, stunned, then softened her voice. I didn't realize how serious it was. "No," I said. "You didn't care enough to ask." Silence pressed between us. Then she stepped closer. "Mom, we can fix this. Just undo whatever you signed. You can move back. I'll help more, I promise." I tilted my head. Now that the money's not coming your way, you suddenly remember I exist? Her face flushed. That's not fair. It's accurate. She sighed, then tried a different tone, softer, wounded. So that's it? You're cutting me off? You're punishing me? No, I said. I'm releasing myself. She blinked. From what? From being someone's backup plan. From being the invisible woman behind every check you cashed and every ride you didn't offer. From the lie I told myself. That love meant loyalty, no matter how little I got in return. Her lips parted. She looked younger all of a sudden. Lost. She whispered. I didn't think you'd ever really walk away. I didn't think you'd ever make me want to. That landed. She blinked hard, but didn't cry. I walked to the door. Opened it. Henry will always be welcome, I said. You'll have to decide if you want to be a part of someone's life without owning it. She stood frozen for a moment, then stepped into the hallway. I'll call you, she said. I didn't answer. I simply closed the door. And for the first time in my life, it didn't feel like I was closing it on family. It felt like I was opening it to myself. That night, I wrote a letter. Not one to send. Not for Henry. Not for Melissa. Not even for the lawyer. It was for me. I sat at the little desk by the window, the lamp casting a soft golden cone across the paper. My hands ached, the joints swollen from age and medicine. But I wrote anyway. Slowly. Intentionally. To the woman I used to be, I began. You tried. God, you tried. For decades you gave and gave, thinking that love was something you could earn, if only you sacrificed enough. You believed that being needed was the same as being valued, that keeping quiet was a kind of grace. The pen moved with steady rhythm, scratching truth into the page. You told yourself that disappointment was just part of the deal, that you were lucky, that other women had it worse, that Melissa meant well. But here's what I want you to know now. You were never a burden. You were never too much. You were just too convenient. I paused, looked up. The night beyond the glass was quiet. A single moth flitted near the porch light below. There is a price to silence, I wrote, and you paid it for too long. So I'm writing this now, not out of bitterness, but because you deserve the truth. It wasn't your fault. You were always enough. The tears came then, not sobs, not loud, just slow and quiet, slipping down like old grief unlodged by the right touch. I folded the paper when I finished, slipped it into the drawer. No envelope, no ceremony. A letter to the self I'd neglected. The woman who carried everyone else's weight while forgetting her own spine. The next morning, I felt lighter. I took my walk around the garden path behind Alder Row, nodded to a few other residents. I noticed I stood a little straighter. No one would have seen it. No one knew what had shifted. But I did. At lunch, I sat with Lorraine from 1C and Mr. Appleton, who always brought his own silverware because he said the plastic made food taste like glue. We didn't talk about anything important, just tomatoes and how the weather had fooled everyone this spring, but it felt warm. That evening, Gwen came by with a small stack of mail. "One for you," she said, holding it out. It was a card, plain white envelope, no return address. Inside, just a line in messy, over-inked ballpoint. "I'm sorry I failed you." No name. I didn't need one. I placed the card on the counter and left it there. No frame, no note back. Let her sit in that silence for once. Let her taste the truth without being rescued from it. That night, I slept the whole way through for the first time in months. No pills, no tossing, just sleep. Clean and deep and earned. It was Henry who brought the cake. A Thursday afternoon, breezy and bright. I was in the middle of repotting my one stubborn geranium when I heard a knock. I opened the door and there he was. Taller than I remembered, shoulders broadening, a light dusting of sun across his nose, and in his hands, a bakery box tied with twine. "Happy no reason day," he grinned. I laughed. Really laughed. The kind that shakes your ribs a little and makes the back of your eyes warm. "What's the occasion?" I asked, stepping aside. "Nothing, or maybe everything," he said. "I just missed you." We sat in my little kitchen. I made tea. He cut generous slices of something chocolate and rich. We ate like we had no one watching, like the world could wait. He looked around. "I like it here. It suits you." "It does," I said. "It's quiet in all the right ways." "Mom said it's small," he added, sheepishly. "Your mother confuses space with meaning," I replied gently. He nodded, like he understood more than I gave him credit for. Maybe he did. We talked about school. He'd made the debate team. He had a teacher who used to be a journalist and now gave assignments that felt like real life. He told me he wanted to study political science, or maybe history. And I listened. Really listened. The way no one ever listens when you're 17 and just starting to say what you want. After a while, he leaned forward. Serious now. "Grandma," he said, "can I ask you something kind of personal?" I nodded. "Of course." He looked down at his cake, then back at me. "Why did you change the will?" It didn't come out accusing, just curious. Thoughtful. I sipped my tea. "Because love without respect is just decoration," I said. "And I've spent enough of my life being ornamental." He tilted his head. "I don't want to give my life's work, my money, my trust, my name, to people who remember me only when they need something," I said. "You never forgot me." He swallowed. "I didn't do anything special." "No," I said softly. "You did the most special thing of all. You showed up." His eyes glistened, but he didn't cry. He just nodded. "Your mom?" he began, then stopped. "You don't have to explain her," I interrupted. "You don't owe her that." "But I feel caught in the middle," he admitted. "She's angry. Says you're being cruel. Says you want to punish her." "Do you think I'm punishing her?" He looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head. "No. I think you're just done waiting." That was exactly it. I reached across the table, touched his hand. "You'll never be caught in the middle, Henry. You're free to love us both, however you choose. But don't ever let guilt be the shape of your love." He nodded. "I want to be better than what I came from." "You already are," I said. We sat for a long time after that. No rush, no performance. Before he left, he pulled out a small box from his bag. "I made this for you," he said, a little shy. I opened it. Inside was a bracelet. Simple braided leather with a single copper bead. Etched into it, in tiny letters, were the words, "I see you." I stared at it, touched the bead like it might vanish if I blinked. "Do you like it?" he asked, uncertain now. I didn't answer. I couldn't, not at first. Then I stood, walked around the table, hugged him, tightly, the way I did when he was small and frightened of thunderstorms. "I love it," I whispered. "I love you." He held me for a long time. When he left, I stood at the door and watched him walk down the path, tall and straight, the sun catching in his hair. When he turned the corner and was gone, I looked down at my wrist. The bracelet sat snug against my skin. Not heavy, just enough to remind me I existed, still, fully, and finally, in the right company. The residents at Alder Row threw a little autumn gathering that Saturday. Nothing extravagant, just cider in paper cups, a tray of cookies, folding chairs set out under the maple trees that dropped leaves like slow confetti. Someone brought a record player, and old jazz floated through the air like it had nowhere better to be. I wore my navy cardigan, the one with the mother-of-pearl buttons and the little mended patch near the wrist. I didn't need to impress anyone. I just wanted to feel like myself. Lorraine from 1C saved me a seat. "If you don't sit next to me, I'll end up beside Gerald," she warned. "He talks about his gallbladder like it's a person." I laughed and sat down. The sunlight was soft, the kind that makes your skin feel remembered. People brought things, photos, scarves, stories they'd already told 3 times and didn't care. We all knew the real gift was being able to tell it again. Around 3 o'clock, Henry arrived. He wore a rust-colored sweater and carried a brown paper bag with handles that barely held together. "Surprise," he said, handing it to me. "Don't get excited. It's mostly things from the farmer's market." Inside were 3 Honeycrisp apples, a jar of strawberry jam, and a small round cheese that smelled faintly of rosemary. I looked up at him. "This is the best gift I've had in years." He sat beside me and watched the old people chatter like sparrows. He didn't fidget, didn't check his phone. Just sat, like someone who understood that presence was a kind of offering. Gwen passed by and smiled. "Your grandson?" I nodded. "Yes, that's mine." She winked. "I see the resemblance." Henry and I shared a cider. He told me he was applying for a summer program, something at a university out west, and he was nervous about the essay. "What's the prompt?" I asked. "Write about a moment that changed your understanding of love." I looked at him. "Well," I said, "that's not vague at all." He laughed. "Yeah, I've started 3 times already." I thought for a second, then said, "Maybe don't start with the moment. Start with the lack of it, the absence. Sometimes that's where the shape of real love shows up." He didn't respond right away, just nodded slowly. "I think I know what you mean," he said finally. I believed he did. As the sun dipped lower, someone turned up the music just slightly. A saxophone wandered its way into a tune I almost recognized. Henry stood, held out a hand. "Dance with me?" I blinked. "Here. We'll embarrass the furniture." "Please," he grinned. "You always told me to say yes to joy, remember?" I did. I had said that. Years ago, after he broke his arm climbing a tree and cried, not because of the pain, but because he thought he'd never play soccer again. "Say yes to joy," I told him, "even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts." I took his hand. We danced, slowly, awkwardly, beautifully. He was too tall and I was too stiff, but it didn't matter. Lorraine clapped. Mr. Appleton whistled. Someone shouted, "That's the spirit." And for a few minutes, the world was reduced to a rhythm and a heartbeat, and a boy I'd once rocked to sleep, now keeping me from falling. When the song ended, we bowed dramatically. Laughter bubbled around us like wind. As I sat down, breathless, Henry whispered, "Thank you for not giving up." I squeezed his hand. "You gave me a reason not to." Some mornings now, I wake before the light. Not from pain, not from worry, just awake. I sit by the window and wait for the first shift of color in the trees. The kind of pale gold that slips across the sky like a quiet apology. No one sees it unless they're still. Unless they've lived long enough to know that beauty doesn't always knock. It just enters. The air carries that early scent of change. Damp leaves, distant smoke. Something old being made new again. My tea steeps slowly. I still use the same chipped cup. The one with the faded blue rim and the crack near the handle I mended with glue and stubbornness. I hold it carefully now. Not because it's fragile. Because I am. But not in the way you think. Not weak. Not breakable. Just weathered. Proven. I no longer measure my life by who checks in or who doesn't. I don't look at my phone for messages that never come. I don't set places for people who've made it clear they're only passing through. I set one place now. For me. Some days, Henry calls. Some days he doesn't. But when he does, it's never out of obligation. It's always real. I see the difference now between presence and performance. Melissa never called again after the letter. She hasn't visited. Not yet. And that's all right. Because I don't need an apology to close a chapter. Sometimes the clearest ending is silence. The manager at Alder Row asked if I'd help new residents settle in, show them around, share how I made the space feel like home. I said yes. Not because I'm healed, but because I'm healing. Slowly. Fully. On my own terms. I spend my afternoons reading, writing letters. Not always to people. Sometimes just to the air, to the girl I used to be, to the woman I became in her place. There's a quiet pride in choosing yourself after a lifetime of being chosen last. A gentle, private triumph in saying, enough, but never too late. If you're reading this, and some part of it feels familiar, if you've been forgotten, if you've been taken for granted, if you've waited by phones and windows and doors that never opened, I want you to know something. You still get to start again. You still get to change your mind, your plans, your will, your world. You are not just what you've given. You are what you choose now. So go on. Pour the tea. Sit by the window. Say no. Say yes. Say nothing at all if that's what peace sounds like to you. But please, if this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of your own silence or your own rising, leave a comment. Say, I'm here. Say, I know. Say what you never got to say before. Not for me. For you. For the woman in you who still waits to be seen.